In this episode, we're talking about how you can use storytelling to deepen connections, how lack of confidence can hurt your career, and what you can do about it to be a more charismatic leader. I'm joined by Adriana Baer, a public speaking coach who specializes in helping clients harness the power of charisma, claim their center stage, and amplify their impact. Stay tuned for valuable insights on unlocking your charisma and maximizing your presence. Welcome to the Midlife Masquerade podcast, where we're reinventing ourselves and writing life's next chapter together. I'm your host, Kine, and I'm here to support you and share inspirational stories from some friends. So let's get cozy and figure it out together. Hi, Adriana. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so grateful that you're here to share your expertise and wisdom on our podcast. But before we get started, can you please introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. I'm so happy to be here. So my name is Adriana Baer. I live in the Portland, Oregon area, and I am a public speaking coach. And I come to this work from 20 years as a professional theater director. And so I approach public speaking from sort of a creative angle and from the relationship of the speaker to the audience. I am a parent of a child who is 7.5. And I have a partner as well. And we live on a couple of acres here up in the rural Southwest Washington area where I like to do a lot of vegetable gardening and planting my feet in the dirt so that I stay grounded inside of my work. And that's the tiny, tiny version of an intro.
That's wonderful. Okay, I'm ready to get into it because I have so many questions for you. First, I want to talk about storytelling, and I know how powerful it is. There's been numerous studies about how powerful storytelling can be. They believe that it can, if you craft a narrative, you can evoke emotions and build trust with your
Mhm.
audience. How can we use this type of knowledge and the impact of storytelling telling to strengthen our connections with people?
Yeah, so I love these studies because they affirm scientifically what I've always known creatively. So I do want to kind of break down some of those keywords that you said in the research just to kind of give a little bit of a scientific context for what I'm about to talk about. So in these studies, what they found was that the listener to a story that is well crafted, and I'll come back to what that means, was able to have an oxytocin release when they were listening to the story. And that oxytocin release then created the feeling of empathetic connection with the storyteller. And so, storytelling, it's so funny because it's probably the most ancient form of oral communication on the planet. Um, and in terms of community connection, but all of a sudden everybody's like, storytelling, what a great idea. It's like, yes, yes, guys, yes, it's a very good idea. It has been a very good idea for millennia. But I love that people are really excited about it now because that's sort of my world. And what they found was that the story needed to be well crafted, not just a series of plot points. So, what needed to happen in the story in order for people to feel connected is that there needed to be a structural arc to the story. And you will hear this called a storytelling arc or a dramatic arc. And this is where I really nerd out because I not only have a background as a theater director, but also as a dramaturg and as a script developer. So I have worked with playwrights for years about how to really tone and craft their work. And so we go way back to old school storytelling theories from like Aristotle and the Greeks, right? And it's all the same stuff that we see today. And it's any TV show, any movie you watch, it's all going to have the basic same storytelling arc. And this is what it is. And so it's really helpful to think about these 5 key points of any story. And if you have these 5 key points and this arc, this is what will allow your audience to feel connected to you. Okay. So the 5 key points are number 1, where I used to be. So it's your sort of starting, we call it the stasis. It's the sort of the first place that you were before anything happened. Then you have what we call an inciting incident. That's basically the thing that happens that launches your journey. Then you go on a journey. Then there's a turning point of some kind. Then you go on more journey. And then there's a new stasis, right? So that kind of where I was, something
Mhm.
happened, then a thing, then I went on a little journey, turning point, journey some more, and now I'm in a new place. That's it. That's like the basic storytelling 101 arc. What happens with some people though is that when they're telling a story, they're really just saying like, you know, I went outside, I walked to the end of the street, I saw a dog, I walked back home, I took a shower, I read a book. That's not story. That's plot, right? So what we have to think about is what are these kind of key turning points or key events that happen that really make up the story. And so what these researchers found, for example, when they looked into this was that what they would did like blood tests on people when they were listening to a story in the middle of it and after, and they found that if they just listened to a plot point tale, there was no chemical shift. When they listened to the same information but delivered with this arc idea,
Mhm.
they had that response. So as you're starting to think about crafting your own story in the world, you want to be thinking about especially that turning point. That's probably the most important thing is the turning point.
Mhm.
So yeah.
Yeah, I find it fascinating because I'm a science nerd. And so I think, I thought it was interesting that they, measured oxytocin in the blood. And again, this is a neurochemical that's linked to empathy and trust and human connection. And so, the participants listened to, the video narratives, and dull, non-narrative videos did not increase oxytocin. And that just made me think about, what is that differentiator? And you answered it perfectly. It's that arc. And so, can
S-
you give us? Oh, sorry.
Well,
Go
I was
ahead.
just gonna say, what just made me think of this. I've never given this example before, but I think anybody who is in their middle age
Yeah.
in the United States is going to remember this. So, do you remember when we would take driver's ed and they would
Yes.
show those videos about like what to do,
Yes.
what not to do? And there was this one that I feel like every single person who got their license in the 90s watched this movie. I think it was called like License to Drive or something. And it basically, what they would do is they would tell you, so you're sitting in driver's ed and you're bored out of your mind. And, because you had to go to like a terrible office space
Hmm.
somewhere, right? We didn't have the internets for this. So you go to this terrible office space and they're like, don't speed, wear your seatbelt, da da da, rules, rules, rules. And everybody's bored out of their mind. And then they're like, okay, now we're going to watch a movie. And they basically would take all that information they just gave you and you would watch a movie about it. Well, guess what we all remembered? The movie. She like took her parents' car and she didn't have her license and she wasn't wearing her seatbelt and she sped and she crashed into the neighbor's trash can and then like the boy she liked came out and she was so embarrassed, right? And it was that was the thing that we remembered. It was all the same information, but presented in story form. Well, we understood the characters.
Hmm.
We felt connected to the who it was that we were seeing. Conveniently, in that they made it so that we were seeing somebody who looked a lot like us, at least in terms of age range, if nothing else. Right. And they showed the emotional intensity of crashing into the trash can in front of the boy you like's house. Right. And so, okay, so we could take this stupid example. I've literally not thought about this since I was 16 until you said that. So let's take this example and put it into that storytelling structure I was telling you about. Right. So if the point that we're trying to make is wear your seatbelt and don't speed, right? So the first stasis is we're going to call her Stacy. I don't remember her name, but let's Stacy is like the ultimate girl name from movies of that era, right? So Stacy is her stasis is She doesn't care about safety. She doesn't care about her, like anybody in her neighborhood. It's just all about her looking cool, right? So that's her stasis. Her inciting incident, what kicks off her journey, is her parents go away for the weekend and they leave their car in the garage. So her stasis is like, I'm a rebel, but she can never do anything. The inciting incident is her parents leave. That's the event. So then her journey is she gets in the car and starts driving around the neighborhood and speeding to look cool. The turning point is when she hits the trash can, and but it's not when she hits the trash can, it's when she looks up and sees the cute neighbor boy. That's the turning point, because she realizes that she's done something really stupid and it's super embarrassing and also really unsafe. Maybe she like hit his dog or something to make it extra intense, right? Then the next part of her journey is realizing, making amends, changing her ways. And now the new stasis is, guess what? Yay, she has her license. She wears a seatbelt. She doesn't speed. Right. So that's like a very basic, dumb example of how a storytelling structure is going to make somebody feel something and remember it. And this is so key for those of us who, for anybody who's doing public speaking, they're doing conferences, or they're even giving a presentation in front of their people at work. They want, people want to be remembered. They want their topics to be remembered. We work hard on the things that we're saying. Same thing with our kids, right? Don't do this, don't do that. Well, when we tell them stories about why, they remember it. Right? It's why, moral of the story is blah, blah, blah. We say that, right? It's because you remember the story.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting that you brought up the kids because I was actually going to talk about that as well because you can see a clear difference between when you give toddlers who have a very short attention span when you give them a lesson or you're trying to make a
Mhm.
teaching moment, and when you're just telling a dull lesson, they're not going to remember or they're already just running off anyways, and as opposed to making it into a story and even weaving them into the story,
Mhm.
it piques their interest and they definitely remember it more, and I'll hear them retelling it to their siblings, and so it's very, very powerful. And I'm curious as to, in terms of context, so I know your expertise is in public speaking, and so how would you leverage the impact of storytelling in front of a huge audience versus a coworker that maybe you have maybe like 5 to 10 minutes of water cooler chat with, but you're trying to deepen those connections, or
Mm.
maybe a standout, or maybe when you're having a one-on-one with your boss and you want to leverage this to connect more deeply. How do you approach those types of scenarios?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think it's important to contextualize what I mean when I'm talking about public speaking, because most people, when they think of public speaking, they think of one person talking to lots of people in some
Mhm.
kind of formal stage-like setting. But public speaking, in my mind, is really when you are talking to one or more people you don't know very well, right?
Mhm.
So this podcast might feel like public speaking to some people because I am speaking to you. We don't know each other very well. And it's a little bit presentational. I know there's an audience listening or watching. Hi, everybody. Right. I know you're out there. So I think context is really important. But I do think that a lot of the stuff that we talk about when we talk about public speaking can be applied, whether it's, like you said, you're talking to your boss or your colleague at work, or lots of people at a conference. The thing that I think is the thing that is my number one key, which I will tell you my like number one question that I think everybody needs to ask and answer, is also the thing I think gets forgotten about the most, which is the other person or the other people. So the number one question that I tell people to ask and answer for themselves is, who am I talking to? Who is my audience is an incredibly important thing to identify when you are deciding how you're going to be doing the speaking, right? Because the way that I'm going to talk to my colleague who I know pretty well, or but I just want to get to know them a little bit deeper, or whatever that is very different from how I might talk in a boardroom full of, 20 men in suits, right?
Mhm.
I might have the exact same information to deliver. I'm going to talk to my colleague about this project that we're working on at the office. The facts are the same, right? I'm then going to present the facts of this to the board. When I'm talking to that one person, my colleague versus the board, my language is going to change, my posture is going to change, maybe my formality or the way I use language
Mhm.
is going to change. And so I think it's really a lot of times we get, this sounds really obvious, but so many, we get stuck in our own heads and then we get in
Mhm.
our own way where we just think it's about us. And ultimately, we speak so that somebody else can understand us, right? In the theater, we always say, a character doesn't stop speaking until they get what they want or they're interrupted.
Mhm.
And that's generally true in life, right? I would stop. I've been talking for a little while. If you started talking, I would stop talking. Or if I was like, and my point is complete and I know you understand it, I would
Yeah.
stop talking, right? So in this context, that is also true. So, but the thing is that relies on the other person, right? So
Mhm.
I am going to speak until I get what I want from you. And if what I want from you is for you to understand my project, or for you to buy in, or for you to say, yes, I love it, and here's some money. What is it that you want from your audience? And you can do this when you know the person, when it's one person. You can do this when it's 40 and you kind of know them. You can do this when it's 4,000 and you don't know them at all. You still want to ask the question, what do I want? What is my objective? And what do I want the audience to do? Right? And is this a moment where I want them to, like, and I often talk about doing this in terms of verbs. So
Mhm.
I want to educate, I want to inspire, I want to motivate. What is the thing that I am doing? So circling this back, right, to the storytelling thing, the way that I think that you can use that is when you say, you already identified it. I want to have a deeper connection with my colleague. Okay. So how do we create deeper connections? Generally, people do that by sharing personal
Mhm.
anecdotes, or even better, asking questions of the other
Mhm.
person, leaning in, being really interested. That is what I'm going to do. That's the tactic. So, theater language again, that's the tactic I'm going to use to get that deeper connection. Now, if I'm talking to my boss, maybe my goal is to be seen as an expert, right? Or my goal is to get him to say yes,
Mhm.
right? You might then choose to use a story to illustrate your point, but your reason for speaking is different depending on the context and who you're speaking to. That in some ways you then can, it's like a hack because you can work backwards from there to
Mhm.
decide what you want to share, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think one of the questions that comes up is when you are sharing this information, let's say you've already analyzed your audience, and let's say it's your boss, and your boss wants you to get the project done, and they want to know when and how fast you can go, and let's say you're wanting his as support on something. So then what type of approach do you use I mean, knowing that, is there more analysis you need to do to figure out a tactic maybe think that's going to be more powerful than someone else who's trying to get his buy-in on an opposing opinion of yours? Like, is there a way to approach it where you're, I guess, more impactful with your story than your colleague that's maybe, going against you? Not I don't know
Sure.
how else to describe it, but maybe
Yeah,
is
yeah.
asking for a budget for their project versus your
Mhm.
project. So is there a way to approach it so that your storytelling or maybe the things you choose to tell is more impactful on the boss's decision?
So this is where I actually would switch it. a little bit and start talking about presentation tactics
Okay.
instead of content, right? So, a lot of the reason why somebody says yes is subconscious uh, belief systems, right?
Mhm,
So, or unconscious belief systems, right? So, a person who has poise, confidence, strength, charisma is seen as more competent and
mhm,
more effective than somebody who doesn't, right? All you have to do is
mhm,
watch a presidential debate or a political debate of any kind. The person who claims that stage, people generally believe them more, even if what they're saying is not what they would, not necessarily what they agree with. So, this is where we start talking about skills and tools that you can use as part of your preparation, but literally in the 10 minutes prior to walking into that room. So, how do you bring your presence into that space in a way that is confident, grounded, clear, professional, leadery, right? Depending on what your goal is, right? So, that is grounding your feet. That is down regulating your nervous system if you're nervous. So then this is the point of the conversation where I think it's really important to start thinking about what is your personal lived experience, okay? Because I'm about to say a lot of tools and tactics, but it really matters what your somatic, so your body experience is like, what your past experience is like, both personally and professionally. All of these things factor in, which is why I think this is why I like to work one on one with people, right? And I do group classes too, but I really find it so effective when I work one on one with somebody because we really want to find out like, what is it for you, not like all these other people. So,
mhm,
for example, there are some people who, before they go to speak, get really, really amped up. They get super nervous. They're like, they feel twitchy. For those of you who are not watching this and are listening instead, I'm doing a lot of movements with my hands, right? Their shoulders hunch up. It's like a anxiety type of energy. There are some people who get the opposite. They kind of go in an extreme catatonic, right? They it's like their system shuts down to protect them. They go into what's called dorsal shutdown, right? So you've got the, sympathetic response of like chaos in the body or the dorsal response of I am not safe, I'm going to play dead. So you even that, well, not just even that in and of itself is extremely valuable information to have about yourself. So for those of you who get really amped up and nervous, you might be the kind of person who needs to do a grounding meditation. So
mhm.
you down regulate your nervous system, you feel your feet planted on the ground, you clear out some of that um, overly anxious energy versus somebody who has the opposite might need to get energy into their system. So for those people, I might recommend running around the block, right? Doing jumping jacks or doing what I call kind of like a reverse grounding meditation where you pull energy up from the earth, depending on what works for you visually, right?
Yeah, that's incredibly fascinating. I think, as you were talking about these techniques that you do, it brought to mind that TED Talk about power poses. And I
Mhm.
recall before interviews, I would go into the bathroom and I
Yeah.
would do like the Superman pose for a minute. And even sometimes in meetings when I was up against, executive leaders under the table, I would actually, just kind of have this stance. I think you're supposed to like lean back and like have your legs kind of apart, and
Yes,
and so
yes,
it
yes.
really did help. And I think you brought up a great point about how it is very individual based. I think there's commonalities that a lot of people share, especially women might share with confidence issues, but there's also individual things about your past. So, for instance, being someone who's Asian,
Mhm.
I grew up in a culture where I was taught not to speak up, not to share my opinions, to always agree. And as an immigrant, sometimes English isn't your first language or whatever language you're trying to communicate to someone in. And so you might have, confidence issues with language barriers. And so
Mhm.
I see that, there's definitely so much value to working with someone like yourself because
Mm.
then you're actually focused on specific things that you struggle with personally based off of your life and your
Yeah.
history.
Yeah.
I think one commonality that I wanted to talk about was women and confidence. And so
Yeah.
there's, a a lot of research has shown there's a confidence gap between men and women. One in particular, by Moore in 2014, examined the difference in confidence levels between men and women across different contexts and life stages. But they essentially found that women would have lower self ratings of their
Mhm.
own abilities, skills, self assurance, and they consistently underestimated their own abilities across both personal and professional settings compared to men. And this part makes me sad because I have both girls and, and a son.
Me too.
So the confidence gap emerged as early as age 6.
I know.
And
Ugh.
the reason why it's so important, to have a coach like you is that this actually leads to women holding themselves back professionally,
Oh, yeah.
and it holds them back from promotions and leadership roles. So then that wage gap, there's a confidence gap associated with it. And so, there's also studies that as women age or as you age, you even lose more confidence. So if you're a woman that's in midlife, you've got
Mm,
a couple of things going against you where you might be suffering from identity loss or just ageism and things that might be adding to your confidence problem. And so that might lead to imposter syndrome in the workplace or, in your
mhm.
professional life. And so I'm curious, what types of tips do you have to help people with this confidence issue, and how do they approach imposter syndrome so that they don't negatively impact their careers?
Mm. Yeah, that was such a well-formed question. Yeah, those studies just blow my mind, especially the one that says I'm gonna misquote it, but it's something like men will apply for a job if they meet 50% of the requirements, and women will apply for a job only if they meet, like, 97% of the requirements.
Okay.
Which is just wild because so many of us have actually written job descriptions before, and we know we're
Mhm.
looking for, like, some great combination of this, but it's not. Oh gosh. So, yeah. So, I've been there myself. I still face that all the time. Um, One of the things, and it's so annoying. I'm just gonna say it's so annoying when people say this because it's like, oh, great, more work for me. Hooray.
Right.
But really, I do think we have to start with ourselves. We have to figure out
Mhm.
where is this coming from and be willing to do the work. So this is counterintuitive, right? For a lot of women, we take it on ourselves. We're like, there must be something that I'm doing wrong here,
Mhm.
right? I want women to be willing to point the blame in other directions and really just name this thing happened. I saw this example. I was taught ABC, right?
Mhm.
Name it, get really familiar with it. What is it that is holding you back? What are the stories you were told? What are the examples you were shown? Let's put all those things on the table, right? Because unfortunately, and this is not the advice that I would necessarily give men, right? But since you're asking specifically
Mhm.
about women overcoming self doubt and imposter syndrome in this context, I think we have to name these things and put them like on the table in front of us. If you're a visual person, I recommend getting a note card and like drawing or writing the word or the thing that happened and literally put it on the table. Look at it, right? So okay, so now we've got some cultural context. What is it that
Mhm.
we're dealing with here? And recognizing that many, if not most, of the things that are blocking us are from the external messaging or culture of society that we are operating inside of. Okay. Now, for some people, they're like, but now I feel
Mhm.
powerless. Okay. No, now we just name the thing. And now we figure out what makes you feel most powerful for you. What works for you? And for each
Mm,
person, again, it's going to be different. So, for example, and sometimes it's really helpful if this is not an intellectual exercise, if this is more of a like gut impulse, physical or emotional thing. Like, what makes you feel most you? Is it running?
mhm,
Is it yoga? Is it swimming? Is it singing? Is it taking an improv class? Is it gardening? I don't know. Where is it where you feel most like you? And then we take that, sometimes it's literally like, cool, so that's something you're gonna do more now. Because we want you to have the experience of feeling like grounded in yourself and celebrating you inside of that.
right.
And then we start practicing these things, but in safe environments, right? And this is why I do think it's so helpful to work with a coach.
Mhm,
It's the same thing with a therapist, right? I'm not a therapist. I don't think coaches are therapists, but it's the same idea, right? Where you have somebody who is outside of your immediate family, your immediate circle. They're invested in your success, but they're like one step removed so they can give you some feedback that you believe and start practicing this stuff in safe environments. And
Yeah,
then you
absolutely.
expand what that is, right? What is that? Then the next step is like, take that out into the coffee shop, take that out into the like office with your close office mates, right? And you start expanding that circle.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, one of the things that you mentioned was finding your thing that you feel most comfortable in. And I can tell you, like, I've tried mindfulness and those mindfulness meditation, and I think that definitely helps. Um, you to calm your thoughts a little bit down so that you can speak more clearly, and that helps with my confidence. And I think studies have shown that it also reduces anxiety and negative
Mhm.
self-perception
Yes.
when you are speaking. And so that's definitely one, I think. But finding that personalized like activity that boosts your confidence definitely
Mhm.
helps. I absolutely hate filming myself. And and as a small business owner, you have to create video content. And so for me, my one thing is dancing. And so
Ah,
sometimes
yay.
I'll dance and I'll be sweaty, and then I feel like this surge and not only dopamine, but just this self-confidence that really
Mhm.
helps me to be on camera, and it doesn't feel as daunting. And so definitely think that you do have to experiment, and you do have to find that activity where you're your most self, and
Yeah.
then you can actually push through. That confidence will help you push through any of that anxiety that you have. And so that was a great point. The last thing I want to ask about is this term. I think you touched on it a little, coming in with charisma. Versus someone that doesn't have charisma or hasn't practiced charisma. So could you touch a little bit on charismatic leadership? Because I think
Mm.
that could, obviously women, studies are showing that we have this confidence gap and we're struggling with imposter syndrome, and it's holding us back professionally. But I do feel like, when you mentioned that uh, there, the difference between like the two types of leaders, one with charisma, one without, that really stirred up a lot of my past experience in
Mm.
seeing a lot of these charismatic men in particular. And this is just my experience because I was in
Mhm.
engineering, so I was mostly around
Mm.
men. And so I saw the difference between how charismatic coworkers were treated versus
Mhm.
non-charismatic people. And I think women were a little bit more inside their heads, a little bit more calculated, a little bit
Mm.
stiffer. And so I'd love to learn more about what is charismatic leadership? How do you build those skill sets if you yourself don't feel like, you have
Mm.
charisma? And what is the difference between charisma and confidence? And so if you could just do a dive into that so that I could kind of
Mm.
understand, like, how do you go up against someone that has this trait or seemingly has this trait, and you see other people responding a lot more to that person, and the only
Mm.
difference might be just the charisma, not really intelligence based or results based.
Right. I mean, it's interesting to think about the difference between charisma and confidence, because a lot of times I think, um, maybe one comes after the other. Like, is it I haven't actually thought about this before in this way, but do you have to have confidence to have charisma? I think that somebody said to me recently on another podcast interview, they're like, can you really teach charisma? And the thing is that I've been a theater director for more than 20 years. Like, there are certainly actors who come in the room that just have like a certain je ne sais quoi, a certain sparkle where you're like, wow, they've got something. But what they might not have is training and skill. And so you might see a little, so this is going to sound like a tangent, but I'm going to come back to it. You might see a little like sparkle and be really attracted to them. But then when you have them come back and read the thing again, or you give them notes, everything kind of falls apart because they don't have the training and the background and the skill.
Mhm.
On the flip side, you might have an actor who's incredibly skilled. They've gotten all the training and they come in and they hit the thing and they've got it memorized, but they're in their own ways so much that they're hiding that spark. They're hiding that true kind of thing that makes them them. And so, excuse me, maybe they're um they have failed at a bunch of auditions in the last couple of months. So their confidence is shaken, right? And so what the best case scenario is, you've got the person with the skill and the training and the confidence who also has that brightness to them. Now, some of the things I'm about to talk about, I want to acknowledge my own bias, which is generally Western culture and generally white Western culture. But some of the things that are interpreted as charisma in our kind of American, generally white American culture, is things like eye contact, right? Like you were mentioning before, which is tricky when your culture is one in which it's considered polite to not have eye contact, right? So, eye contact, grounded feet. So a lot of things will happen where people, when they get nervous or they haven't really thought about this before, they'll shuffle their feet or they'll pace a lot. They might have a head position that's slightly to the side or tucked back, so they don't seem as confident. They might have hunched up shoulders or bad posture, right? Or they're clenching their muscles really tight, right? There are all these kind of subtle nonverbal cues that are happening with people that are essentially, to get a little woo-woo here for a second, blocking their energy. Because a lot of what charisma really is it's just a spark of energy,
Mm.
right? It's like a presence, it's a sparkle, it's a you put whatever word makes sense for you, right? It's a divinity, I don't know, right? What is it that is it's an untangible thing that is really an energetic uplift. So I think it's most important to identify what might be blocking that thing, because most of us came into the world like little sparkly beings. You see a
Mhm.
3-year-old, 4-year-old, 5-year-old before they start being told that something is wrong about them. They're just like they're being them. And like I don't know that I've ever seen a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old where I'd be like, whoa, no charisma, no confidence, no sparkle, right? So what we can understand about that, if you really think about it, that means that it's there, and it's been taught out of us, or we've been taught to do something else instead. Now, in our last just couple minutes, I want to say that I think sometimes, especially for women, um, especially women who are our age, we grew up in a time where like we didn't see a lot of women leaders, and the women leaders we saw were very masculine in their
Mhm.
energy. So it was like pants and big shoulders, and like, how can I be as unsexy and as masculine as possible? Because that's what a leader looks like. That's no longer true in our world. There are
Mhm.
charismatic leaders who are women who are very feminine and everything else, but we've been again, it's like what were we taught? So noticing all of the places that are blocking you that you can open up. It doesn't mean you have to show up vulnerably and tell them everything about you. That's not what I mean. What I mean is like grounded self-confidence,
Mhm.
grounded presence. Grounded presence and the word presence in and of itself can be that charisma opener that we're looking for. So,
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. I think that's really useful to keep in mind. I mean, it kind of goes back to what we were talking about, finding that activity that helps you feel comfortable. Because
mm,
when you were talking about, toddlers having charisma and, it's probably goes back to them being allowed to play and be themselves. And so maybe it is about, grounding yourself and being present enough to say, hey, you're allowed to play, you're allowed to be yourself, and just creating that safe environment for yourself so that you can be more playful. And in doing that and doing whatever activity that, really makes you comfortable and allows you to be authentic, that's maybe how you can come, your charisma can increase. And so, I mean,
and
that,
energetically take up space, right? Because
right,
that's a
right, exactly.
big
Yeah.
issue that you were talking about. These men walk in, they take up a lot of
Yes.
space. So,
Yeah.
how can you take up more space without pretending to be somebody other than who you are, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes people can take up a lot of space very quietly, right? So you don't
Absolutely.
have to be brash in order to take up space, but it is
Yeah.
something we have to be thoughtful about.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good point. And then and we don't necessarily have to be, approaching it like men do. I think it's
Yeah.
funny that you brought up that, when we were growing up, we had women leaders that were very masculine. And I thought
Yeah.
about Theranos, Elizabeth Holmes, and, you know,
Yes.
she,
Oh god.
even deepened her voice and,
Yeah.
she put on suits. So, I mean, and turtlenecks similar to, uh, to the men in tech. And so, like,
Yeah.
I could see that, there was this set standard back in the day. And so it's
Mhm.
really great that you brought up that it doesn't have to be that way. It can be this
No.
like quiet confidence, and you can still exude charisma through that rather than imitating, your male partner or
Mhm.
coworker in
Right.
that sense.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
then
So,
hopefully the culture around you is doing their work too, right? To
yeah,
understand that
absolutely.
leadership can be lots of different things. But that's for a
Yeah.
different episode.
Yeah, absolutely. But that is a really good point because, I mean, even if you do all this and practice on yourself, you still have to be in an environment that recognizes and appreciates it and values
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
So, okay, thank you so much. Key takeaway that you have for listeners today.
Yeah. I would say that my key takeaway is that you can do this your way, but I think it's almost impossible to do it on your own.
Mhm.
Because what we are talking about here involves at least one speaker and at least one listener. The definition of theater is one performer and one audience member, right? We can't do it in a vacuum. And I think with so much technology and so many resources, we think, oh, we'll just get all the tools and we'll practice them on our own. And then, you know, that'll be that. But I think it's really important to get feedback, whether that's from a coach or just like a friend, to start to practice these things outside of your own head and aloud. I think that's really important.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for joining me today. I learned so much, and I'm glad we had this wonderful discussion.
Yeah, thank you.
And if you want a chance to work with Adriana, you can find her on her website, claimcenterstage.com backslash one on one. And those are numeric ones. I'll include it in the show notes. She's currently offering free one on one consults. So hopefully you get a chance to work with her. Thank you again for listening, and I really appreciate your attention. I'm trying to build an inclusive community where we can connect and support each other. So, if you could find me and connect with me on social media, my handle is at KMEE Designs. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed the episode, please take a moment to leave a glowing review. It would make my whole day if you did that. And please share this with your friends and family. Your support means more than you know. Seriously, thank you.